Hello and welcome to the Contact a Family and National Network of Parent Carer Forums webinar. Today's webinar is about developing your region. My name is Maroon Sisodia. I'm the National Network of Parent Carer Forums representative for the East of England. Prior to that, I was the chair of the Bedford Borough Parent Carer Forum, and I was also the chair for a couple of years of the Eastern region of Parent Carer Forums.
Hello there everyone, my name is Corwinda Bowler. I'm the East Region Parent Carer Forum Chair. I'm also the Chair of the Luton Parent Carer Forum, and it's a pleasure to be here delivering this webinar today. Okay, so this is a webinar, so if there is a technical hitch, please do bear with us. We'll try and get it fixed as quickly as possible, and hopefully all of you who are joining will be able to see this introduction slide. I'm going to move on. As there's a lot of attendees today, it's not practical for us to take verbal questions, and so that you all will remain muted throughout the session. If you do have any questions, please go to the questions icon at the bottom of the screen as it's shown here, and you'll be able to post questions. That'll allow the webinar administrator to send them on to us, and we will try and answer as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the session. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a short questionnaire will pop up for you. It'll be great if you can fill that in for us, because that will help us to develop future online training events. So, without any further ado, let's launch into the meat of the session. So, this webinar is about developing your region, and really it's about why the regions are important and how you might think about developing your region. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of the points to begin with, which are firstly, why are the regions important? Why we believe the region is such an important has such an important place in parent participation. Then, what do you want your region to do? What are your priorities, and what areas of work should you get involved in? Because one of the key things is that each region is different, and I think each region has to find its own feet and find its own way. Okay, and then you might also hear us talking across each other. We're probably going to be doing that throughout the webinar, but specifically the area that I'm going to share with you is how to set your region up, and we'll be looking at decision making, roles and responsibilities, and money. And then a small session around lessons learned, because we have been running for 3 years now in the Eastern region, possibly a bit longer. And obviously an opportunity for questions.
So, first section, why are the regions important? The first one, I think, is what we've called the gap between the law and its application. So the law and policy is developed at the centre, at organisations, at government departments like the Department for Health, the Department for Education, and then is enforced by organisations like Ofsted. And those are centralised organisations, often based in London, often in an ivory tower, often in the Palace of Westminster. And against those regions, we interface with them through the National Network of Parent Carer Forums. However, the law is applied, policy is applied, services are delivered at a very local level, because the best will in the world, I've never had a minister deliver a single service directly to me. It's delivered to us through local people on the ground. And against these local services, we obviously have the local forums network. However, there's a gap in the middle. And increasingly, I think a lot of thinking, a lot of policy is developed at a regional level. How the law, the legislation that's set at a national level is actually interpreted and worked through is being discussed and being thought of at a regional level. And that's where we think that the regions, the network of parent carer forums really play a major role. Next up is communication. sometimes we've all had this experience where it's difficult to get heard, and it can be a long way from the Palace of Westminster to your front room. The success of the NNPCS and success of local forums depends upon good communication. And the regions play a critical role in this, because what's going on in your front room is critically important to us in the NNPCF, and equally well, it's critically important for you when you're running a local forum to understand what's going on at the national level. And the regions have a really important role in that communication. In us as the NNPCF, and me in my NNPCF role, understanding what's going on at the local level, and then being a mechanism, a really strong mechanism for us to communicate what's going on at the national level down through to you at the local level. The next point where we think the regions have a really important role to play is understanding that they're all our children, providing peer support. And we'll say a little bit about this later as well. But one of the best ways of supporting each other as forums is through learning what other forums have done. And there's no better place to do that than through your regional network. The more we support each other, the more we can support our children. And lastly is this idea of succession planning. I firmly believe that leaders are made and not born. The picture you see on the left of your screen there, you probably won't recognize as a young military officer in the Boer War. But that young military officer turned into the Prime Minister we recognize as Winston Churchill. And he did that through experience, through stepping up through the ranks of the military and through government. The young boxer you see on the left-hand side there turned into the great statesman we recognize as Nelson Mandela. Again, Nelson Mandela went through a great learning experience in formative years. And the regions provide a really good opportunity for us all to learn and grow as individuals. And what we learn and grow, we can apply both at a national level, but also in our own forums. So I think that the regions play a really critical role in our succession planning and our sustainability and capacity planning as a national network. Next up, I'm going to take you through a few slides about deciding what you want your region to be and do. And I think this is absolutely critical, because unless you've got a very clear idea of what you want from your region, it's pretty difficult to deliver it. There are lots of things that your region can do. Your region plays a very important role in communication, and some of those points there are about sharing experiences between neighbouring forums. I've talked already about escalating local and regional concerns to a national level, and I've also talked about disseminating national information to a regional and a local level. The regions can also be a really great source of support. So we found the region acting as a sounding board for local forums. Local forums come along to regional meetings and say, has anybody else found this is happening? Or what have you done when that has happened? And there's always lots and lots of good advice and real learned experience in the room. Our regions have been a really good mechanism for sharing best practice. For example, one of our local forums has done some great work with seldom heard groups, which they have offered to share. And we've also done a little bit of peer-to-peer support between local forums. So where forums have, for example, got great local practices or great local policies and procedures, we have shared those. Next up is regional co-production. And this is one of the key things that I think the East of England we've been very successful in doing, is working with our regional bodies to influence policy, delivery and commissioning, and then also raising the profile of SEND within regional bodies. And there have been examples where in the past with the NHS, we've actually successfully managed to raise the SEND reforms up their agenda through working as a region. And lastly, there's the thought that there are some things that individual forums maybe can't do on their own that the region can actually do if it gets together. So things here are specialized training for perhaps the more experienced representatives. Some larger events have been run in some regions, and also guest speakers, some of whom might be a little bit too expensive for an individual forum, but the region can get together and work together and pay for those. But the key thing is that you as a region need to work together to agree what your priorities are, what you want to achieve, and then everything else follows from there. One of the points that we've had raised to us is why do we have the sort of setup that we've got with a regional chair as well as an NNPCF representative? And Kulvinder will talk a little bit later about the role of the regional chair, but I think that I wanted to draw this out very clearly here using this, hopefully what is a very familiar graphic for you, which is that the NNPCF rep has a quite distinct role to the regional chair. And the idea is that the regional chair is responsible for running the regional network, and then the NNPCF representative is responsible for representing the views of the regional network at a national level. The regions are really important to us in the NNPCF because with the best will in the world, we just cannot hope to reach our 80,000 members. It's 82,000, I was told the other day, members without the regional networks. You know, unless we hire out Wembley Stadium for our conference, I don't think that's possible. We need the regional networks providing that communication link. So some of the things that we have actually done in the East of England at a regional level, here's some examples for you. So we work very closely with our peer network. We have termly peer network meetings, the peer network being the group that's funded through the Department for Education for the implementation of the SEND reforms. We attend the peer network governance group, and there's a monthly peer network telekit that I join as well. With our local NHS region, we've been involved in a number of areas, so the Transforming Care agenda, the strategic clinical networks, which have now, that particular structure has now folded, but some of the working groups that were a part of the strategic clinical networks remain. There's the SEND regional leads meetings, and also the NHS sustainability and transformation plans. As the NNPCF, we also run regional meetings that Kulvinder chairs for us, and we also run regional and training events and sessions as well. And there's other things that have been developing very nicely in the East of England that we wanted to share with you. We have a education, health and care plan review, peer review process where the local authorities review each other's plans, and I think that other regions have this as well. We've been doing some local offer peer reviews. Two groups that we're trying to build contacts with that we haven't so far are the Association of Directors of Children's Services, ADCS, and the Association of Directors of Adult Services, the ADAS. And as a region, through working with our peer network, we're looking to develop some links with those groups. And in the past, we've also had things like regional SENCO meetings and regional educational psychologists meetings where we've worked with those groups. So there's a huge amount of activity that has taken place in the East of England at a regional level. But again, this is something that you'll need to explore in your region and figure out what your priorities are and which levers you want to pull. I'm going to hand over to Kulvinder now, who's going to talk a little bit about setting the regions up.
Thank you. Right, so how do you set up a region? Well, this is how we did ours. Okay, we have core building blocks. Personally, I see a region as a supersized forum. So if we can think of it in that regard, we can perhaps make it less scary, because let's face it, when you think about setting up a region, it probably seems quite daunting. For the first instance, we need good governance. So, you know, we really need to have clear ideas of what roles are, what our policies and procedures are, and I will cover each of these in a bit more detail as we go through the slides. Clearly, we need to have people on board and people that are capable and able to think think off in different directions, and also to be very committed to the role. And clearly there's an element of money involved. But the one that stands out for me personally out of all of those is the values. Now, unless we have core values, it's very difficult to gel a region together. Values for us tends to be the cohesion, the glue that keeps everything ticking over. Often when I think about this, it reminds me of the cartoon Finding Nemo, where there's these fish caught in a trawler net, and the only way out is for all the fish to swim in one direction. And if we look at working together and values and core values in that way, what you can do is amazing. Okay, so governance. It's a very light touch. We have 11 forums in the Eastern region, and we meet termly. We have a range of policies, and those are a few that are listed there. These are updated as often as possible, but mostly annually. And what we tend to do is use these as our bedrock for steering our day-to-day work. So everyone's really aware of what their roles and responsibilities are, because we have job descriptions. There's a clear code of conduct that we have to follow. Representatives all agree, and they sign an agreement policy. We have feedback forms, so when our reps attend meetings, there's a clear opportunity to feed that back, so that those boroughs, those forums that weren't in attendance can actually benefit from the information that was shared. And clearly there's a payment policy and an expenses policy, and all of these are available. Okay, so people, as I've mentioned, I'm the chair. I have a vice chair, and an amazing secretary, an amazing treasurer, and we've already heard from our national network regional rep, and we have our CAF regional advisor. Now, all of these people are absolutely instrumental. We need to work together with each other, and clearly we need to be able to be on the same page as well. And the cycle that we tend to follow is a 2-year chairship. This is my 3rd year as chair, and the vice chair will then take over in 18 months' time. And the vice chair, in addition to her vice chairing role, also administrates the parent reps to attend the various different meetings. The chair is elected. It's not a post that people just volunteer for. So, well, you do volunteer for, but you are elected to that position, and that's really, really important, because you then know that you're doing the role based with support and recognition from your area. In addition, or as an alternative, you could have a rotating chair. This may work better for you. It's a way of ensuring that all forums within the region play an active role in being a chair. It's also a way of helping to share the workload, and it supports succession planning. Lastly, or you could, sort of just use it as an opportunity to improve your skill sets. What I would really say is that while it sounds daunting to be a chair, you learn so much more. You do have the opportunity to stretch yourself, and through that stretching you become, I feel, more empowered and skilled in areas that you probably thought you would never be able to succeed in. Okay, I'd just like to shout out to our secretary, an immense woman. She is a great person, but what's really key here is you need someone that's got excellent administration skills. Someone that doesn't can actually take the pressure of managing the minutes, following up minutes, maintaining all the different policies and procedures within the forum within a timely manner. And the reason I really value this particular role is that you can't run a forum unless you have someone that's got that attention to detail and the oversight to see how a change might impact other knock-on policies, for example. So I've got people in the team that will wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, make a note of something, and then think, that's how I'm going to improve it. You can't ask for more diligent, people to be working within the forum. So having someone that's that dedicated really, really does help. Okay, the treasurer, equally our finances and making sure the records are up to date and monitored accurately and people are paid on time, immensely important. And again, a big shout out to our treasurer there too. It's essential that you as a chair or a steering group know what spend you are, what spend you have and what your finances are, because critically it will impact on what you can participate in. And you'll see that a little bit later on.
So I'm going to talk about the role of the NNPCF representative. Probably makes sense, being that's me. I see the role of the NNPCF representative as being 4 things. It starts with really understanding the lived experience of families with SEND within the region. So I do that through attending the local and regional meetings. We have a regional social media page. We do look at the surveys and reports that our local forums put out, but the most important thing is actually listening to people, actually talking to people and understanding what they're going through. Next up, I need to distill those all that I hear and represent those experiences with my colleagues at the NNPCF to formulate our policies and our positions. And then the third element of my role is then working with the other NNPCF representatives and my colleagues on the steering group to represent those policies and positions to decision makers at a regional and a national level. And then the last element of the role, and this is critically important, is then actually closing that communication loop, is actually communicating back to my region and the local forums in that region what's going on at a national level. And that in a nutshell, those 4 things in a nutshell is what I consider the key role of the NNPCF representatives to be. Moving on to the Contact a Family Regional Advisor. So we've been very lucky in that we've had really good support from Contact a Family when we wanted to develop our region and start to do some new things, including getting that very first discretionary grant. So we will still work very closely with our Contact a Family Regional Advisor, both through local forums but also as a region. So we discuss with Julie very clearly what we want to do as a region, how we want to go about it, how we might want to express that in our grant application forms. The regional advisor plays a really important role in making sure that the region at a local level and a regional level continues to run smoothly. I'm going to say a little bit about money now before handing back over to Kulvinder. So this year there is no central regional funding pot through Contact a Family. I think last year there was an opportunity for regions to apply for £2,000. This year that's changed a little bit. Instead, regions can apply for a discretionary grant, and that grant is available right now. I think one of the big things that to say is that there's not necessarily an upper limit on that grant. So once you have determined as a region what you want to do, Contact a Family have advised that you should apply for that. That's not a guarantee that you'll get it all, of course, but once you've got a reasonable ask, you can apply for that through the discretionary grant application process. Some of the things that Contact a Family asked me to raise with you, just to flag up to you when you're thinking about that discretionary grant application, are that firstly the application should be signed by the regional chair and the chair of the group holding the money, and I think Kulvinder is going to talk a little bit more about money and what we've learned in a moment, and things you might want to use the discretionary grant for. So it can be used to cover the running costs of the region, so venues, refreshments, expenses, any agreed remuneration. You can use the money to hold a regional conference. So I think the Northeast has had a very successful regional conference recently. Use the money for regional training or speaker days, for example,
some of the more specialised or expensive training that may not be practical for an individual form to hold. And some regions have actually paid for a social media coordinator because they found that a really effective way of getting messages to and from one another and up to the region in general.
Okay, so where does the money come from in the East? Right. Well, we have contributions from each of our member forums. Now, this is something that's agreed at our meetings. It's not something that changes very often. And it's based on the services that we actually provide to the region. I'll cover a little bit more as to what they are as we go through them. And obviously the discretionary grant that comes from Contact to Family. We were really lucky this year that we had the discretionary grant and the normal grant, the normal cap grant. But like Marino said, the discretionary grant is the one that's going to take its place from now on. In addition to that, we're funded by the peer network. This funding's also been really enabling to ensure that parent participation accesses all the peer network training that's set up in our region. So those are the three core areas of our funding pots at the moment.
And just if I might add to that, we've found that the funding from the peer network has been really, really important in increasing participation, because our funding from the peer network actually was agreed quite early on last year, but didn't actually arrive in our bank accounts till quite some time later. But once we had the money and we were able to recompense local representatives to attend peer network meetings, we found that attendance and participation at those meetings increased a great deal.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a clear link with enabling participation and having the money to pay for attendance. Okay, other sources. Marino,
yes, and there may be other sources that are available to you in your region that we're not tapping into in the East of England. For example, previously we did get some funding from the NHS in the East of England through the strategic clinical networks. And that's a conversation I'm hoping to pick up with our NHS England colleagues in the East of England to get a little bit of funding from them, because we do quite a lot of work from them. But there may be other sources that are available to you. And again, this will depend very much on the types of work that you choose to do in the region and the type of work that you prioritize. And I'd recommend that you go and have those conversations with the people you're supporting to do that work in order to get a little bit of money from them.
Right, so how do we manage our money in the East? Well, Hertfordshire is our banker, one for a better word, and really that's primarily because we don't have a bank account in our own name. So they very kindly act as that for us. So some of the things that you could consider is there a forum in your region that's willing to do this for your regional setup? In addition to that, we have two sign-off processes. I sign off claims, as does the Hertfordshire chair. And again, this is something you could consider. Is that a method that you could possibly set up in your area? Just to show you, well, just to share with you about our financial control policies, we have a belt and braces approach where we also adhere to the Hertfordshire policy, but also have to have one of our own. And again, this is something that you need to think about, because Hertfordshire policy will cover to a certain extent, but it won't cover the fact that we're a region. So two sets of policies were necessary for that particular point. And lastly, the budget with regards to regional meetings include contributions from our forums. We tend to ask our forums to contribute simply because it's a sustainable method of ensuring there is some money in the pot, if you like. So again, you need to sort of have those conversations and see what the priorities are for your area. For us, it was primarily to ensure that there was an opportunity for peer-to-peer support, and that opportunity for learning from others' experiences was there. And that's really that fund that comes from the forums enables us to have our regional meetings. It pays for the venues, and it pays for the secretary's time, treasurer's time, and obviously the chair's time to write the agenda and chair those meetings. So it's that sort of those are the sorts of tasks that the regional fund will pay for. Did you want to add anything?
No, and I think that the overlay I'd add to this is perhaps to emphasise the point I made earlier, which is that it's really important that you agree what your objectives and your priorities are as a region, and then the money follows that. So build your budgets around your priorities, not the other way around.
Thank you. Okay, value. These are all our children, as we've had before. But what's really important on a regional basis is that we are complementary and not competitive. It's absolutely fundamental that we see each other as a positive ally, a strength and a source of experience, and learn from each other. It's that positivity, the enthusiasm that's going to really make the region gel together. We need to be solution focused. If one forum's got a difficulty, we need to think together of a possible solution. And we need to celebrate our differences. I mean, we have different sized forums within the Eastern region. My own forum's tiny compared to Peterborough, Norfolk, or even Cambridge. You know, it's completely geographically different, the diversity is different, the issues are different, but in amongst all that difference is a core thread of commonality, and that's what keeps the cohesion and the forums working together for common purpose. So I would really, really support and nurture the opportunity to set up a forum, because we really are much, much stronger together than we are individually. And again, it goes back to the same point. This is for all our children. So lessons learned. Well, like I say, I've been chair for 2 years. This is my 3rd year now. And in the very first instance, I would say policies are as good as policies are until policies are tested. One of the things that came across very clearly was that if your policy hasn't, for example, if the financial policy doesn't have stipulated end dates for claims made or claims put in, then that could lead to difficulties later in the day, when late claims might be surging at the time that you think no more claims are going to be coming forward, which could tip the balance in terms of cash that you thought you had, which then suddenly you haven't got because of these changes and claims that have been made. This was an area that had actually happened to us, and the fact that we were supported by Hertfordshire County Council to bridge that shortfall in cash was another good reason for having a forum supporting us and holding our account. So it prevented us falling into a negative situation because we were supported by this, other forum. So, like I say, policies are as good as policies are until you test it, and that certainly enabled us to see where the gaps in our policy were and fill them. So, moving on to people, we need to ensure that we have enough reps. We have a range of work streams, and people that tend to form regions tend to be people that are quite active within their own forum, and if that is the case, then there is always that work balance commitment that's coming forward. So, you'll have a range of commitments within your local forum, and then a range of commitments within your regional forum, and that can lead to not enough reps to go around. We do train and support all of our reps, and training is absolutely key. And sometimes stepping up can be a challenge, and all I can say to you is it is a challenge in theory, but actually in practice it's actually a massive learning opportunity. And if you can hold on to the positive, that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, you'll touch areas that you never thought you could actually reach. With regards to the different hats we wear, I've already alluded to the fact that if you're active in your own forum and you end up active in the region, it's having that clarity of which hat you're wearing in a meeting. Are you there as a regional rep? If so, then your individual local forums aren't really the area that you need to be focusing on in a regional meeting. So just have that clarity, because you're there for all the region and not for your individual forums benefit. So that's the point really to take home there. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Maroon?
No. Yeah.
Okay, challenges with money. Ensuring we have enough funds. I've already sort of touched on that, but I think Maroon touched on the delay in funding earlier. Although verbally we might receive the funds, physically receiving the funds can have an impact on participation, and that's just something to be mindful of. But also to be mindful of that when you do apply for grants, that there is a process that has to take place between the point of applying and the point of receiving. So just be prepared for the lag in between. And obviously culture. As you know, I can't stress enough the importance of having a unanimous voice. There is this greater good, and if we can sort of all within our regions capture that, then I think we will be a hard voice to ignore and voice to be reckoned with. Anything? Okay, so successes. Well, it's, as I've alluded to already, difficult to ignore. To ignore 11 voices as a forum. It's a greater good approach, but the peer-to-peer support has been something that, as a small forum, that we've really benefited from. I mean, Luton is a tiny forum, and in comparison to the learning curve that we had in terms of the policy documentation, because of the network contacts that we had, we were able to go to our local forums in the next authority and say, look, we're struggling with this. Can you help us write a particular policy on, I don't know, expenses or something? You know, that camaraderie and the respect and confidence that you have within each of the other forums is really crucial and well worth nurturing. And as I've alluded to several times, you know, a strong region requires an exceptional secretary and an exceptional bookkeeper, and we have both. So Sylvie Jenkins and Cherie Banksley, thank you very much for all your efforts in the area.
That sort of wraps up the formal bit of the presentation. But I suppose by way of conclusion, I thought I'd sort of summarise it by saying that the regions are like our local forums. We've got a wonderful range and diversity of people involved in our movement, and the regions should reflect that, just as the local forums reflect that. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for how you need to run your region, because it's got to reflect your own regional style and priorities and challenges. So up front, take the time to decide what you're about, what's important to you as a region, and then build your structure around that. So build your governance and build your budgets around what you want to achieve. But taking that time up front to decide what you want is time well spent. And we in the East have found it incredibly beneficial, both as a region and as local forums, to be part of a very strong regional network. And I find it, as an NNPCF representative, absolutely invaluable that I've got such a active regional network that not only supplies me with the information I need, but also challenges me and keeps me on my toes around what I'm doing as well. So I think that's incredibly valuable. And I think Kulvinder alluded to it. We certainly haven't got everything right. We've had more than a few stumbles along the way, and I'm sure that we will face a few more, but with the right attitude, the right values, and the spirit of camaraderie, I'm pretty confident that we'll muddle our way through to be successful. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and bear with us whilst we just turn to the other screen just to see what questions have been coming through. So one of the questions that I know Kulvinder and I have been asked the most is about money, and I'm hoping that we've sort of addressed those some of those points there. But another area that we've been asked about is how on earth do you get all the different forums in a region to agree on what priorities are and a way of working. I suppose if I can describe how we did it initially in the east of England and how we continue to do it on an ongoing basis, that might be hopefully of some benefit to you. So I think what we started with was 2 blank pieces of paper, and then we filled them. The first blank piece of paper was actually about values, and Kulvinder's spoken a lot about those. So what did we want to be to each other? What kind of relationship did we want? What were the values we all as individual forums wanted to espouse when we came together as a region? So we started by really agreeing our values and what we wanted to be. Then we actually filled in the second piece of paper, which was about what was most important to us. What kind of organisation do we want to be, and what our priorities were. And we gave ourselves a number of different scenarios. Did we want to be a really strong, tight network that was very closely governed, or did we want to be essentially an information sharing shop? And we looked at a number of options in between, and unsurprisingly, we decided that we didn't want to be just an information sharing and talking shop. Neither did we want to be a really strongly governed, very heavily monitored, time-intensive group, and we settled for something in the middle. But we had the discussion about what we wanted to be, and it's from those 2 discussions about agreeing what our purpose was and what our values were that we were able to move forward. And each year we go through a similar exercise, and Kulvinder and I are going to discuss this later this week, I think, about what we want to achieve as a region over the next year, and then agree that. And so we keep it live, we keep it current, because as we know, the real world keeps on changing around us.
Indeed, yes. It's absolutely key that you take that opportunity to sit down and do that exercise, because without a common theme, a common view and a common approach, gelling a region is quite difficult, because you need to be able to see, because there are going to be times when people disagree, or the things aren't as you would expect them, but it's that core that you can then go back to, that core value that you remind yourself, yes, this is why we're here, and it really does matter, and it really does make a difference.
So we've got a few questions coming in. The first one is about money, which is, how did you persuade your forums to contribute? I think that Kulvinder kind of touched on this in that we set the agenda for the region as a region, and then we figured out how we were going to pay for that agenda. And what we've done is we've worked up, if we want to do what we have agreed that we want to do as a region, this is how much money we're going to need, and this is how we're going to have to fund it. So we asked for a very modest amount from each of our member forums. From recollection, Kulvinder, it's around £200, is that right?
No, not at all. It was £120 per forum, and that's sustained us for the best part of 2.5 years, I believe. And we've just only this year thought about slightly increasing it to ensure that all our venue costs and actual time and materials are covered for those regional meetings. Another question that came to mind or has just come through is with regards to what happens if nobody wants to be a chair. Well, actually, this is actually quite difficult, because being a chair tends to scare people, and I can see why, because it feels quite daunting. But the way we've managed to sort of succession plan in this instance is to have a vice chair role that runs concurrently, and the vice chair dips in and out of the same meetings that the chair can or can't attend, and that way you can sort of ease yourself into the role and ease yourself into the paperwork around all the different grants that you're applying for, and obviously the monitoring that's required of them. So by sort of having that two-tiered approach, what you're having is, or what you're doing is, you're giving someone the opportunity who wants to perhaps be the chair to test out the waters before actually being the chair, if that makes sense. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, another question that's come in is, do all of your forums contribute or just some? And how do you manage those that don't pay? All of our forums have agreed in theory to contribute. However, in practice, we have found that some forums have either been very, very slow in paying, or I think there's been some occasions where some forums haven't actually paid what was agreed. And I suppose that there's an approach. There's a number of approaches we could take to this, but the one we've decided to go on with the East of England is perhaps more of a conciliatory approach rather than one that uses the big stick, which is, we all know that forums, firstly may have run into difficulties. We know that forums sometimes stumble and have issues themselves, and so we have always allowed the space for those forums that are perhaps struggling and haven't been able to pay or paid late. And perhaps it's an opportunity for us to see an opportunity for us to provide some peer support rather than beating them up, is perhaps the way to go. I suppose the other thing to say is that we've never had a huge amount of trouble convincing forums to contribute, all the forums to contribute in theory, because we actively work very hard to engage them all in deciding what the region is about. So it's not a case of the regional agenda being separate to their agenda. The regional agenda, we always try to ensure aligns with and supports the local agenda, and very often and usually has actually been set by the local forum. So it's not a regional agenda versus a local agenda, it's one shared agenda. So we found that forums have always been willing to contribute once we've agreed what we're about.
And obviously it links back to the core values and having that core theme that runs through. So that really sort of enables forums to make sure that they do contribute and do so willingly. Okay, we're just seeing what the next question is.
I think that's sorry, but bear with us. Gwyneth is checking her laptop to see if any more questions have come through. No, I think that's it. Thank you for attending today. If you do think of any questions that you haven't posted to us, then please feel free to forward them on to us, and we'll gladly try and answer them for you. And with that, I think we'll close the webinar down. I think a short survey will pop up, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete that. So thank you for attending.
Thank you.